Activation warning. This episode contains explicit and graphic descriptions of suicide, self-harm, sexual assault, and rape. Discretionary caution and action is required. This episode is not for children. Please use extreme self-care in listening to this episode and seek immediate help through the National Suicide Hotline by dialing 988 if you are emotionally activated or triggered by the content of this episode. Or if you are activated and need help from the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673.
I just did not want it to be true. I didn't want to hear the fact that I had been raped by someone I was in a relationship with. And yes, I continued to be in that relationship and I continued to be intimate with him, but it was never the same. I was internally so numb, and whenever we would get intimate, I would just dissociate and I would just let everything happen. I just didn't care anymore because I just thought, well, I'm just here. I don't even have to do anything anymore. I'm just there for use, I believe.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm glad you're here. You've just tuned into one of the most important podcasts that you may ever listen to, because the purpose of this podcast is to provide a safe space for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault to share their stories and connect with others who've been through similar experiences. However, there are other important aspects to this podcast: community, education, and support. I believe that sharing our stories is one of the most important steps to healing, and my hope is that the SAS podcast will help victims and survivors feel less alone and more empowered. And my ultimate goal is to provide all of my listeners with insights, resources, and a supportive space where empathy, compassion, and understanding thrive. My commitment is to being there for all my listeners. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and I'm here each week talking to victims and survivors or interviewing experts and professionals in order to not only gain insights and information to help us on our healing path, but also to provide an education on being trauma-informed, working to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Whether you're aware of it or not, we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. So I encourage everyone to listen to this podcast. Whatever your experience is with rape or sexual assault, you are not alone, and we are all here for each other. Thank you again for being here. Hey everyone, it's great to have you back with me this week. Thank you for inviting me to join you in your day. This is episode 62, and it's an honor to have as my guest today, Stafylaki. Iri is a SAS listener from Switzerland, and a few weeks ago, she reached out to me on Instagram Messenger to tell me that after listening to Scarlett Robertson's gut-wrenching episode, she had decided to tell her story as well, and wondered if I would provide the platform for her. When we spoke by phone, it was quickly evident that Iri had a story that was more than worth sharing, and that she was definitely in a strong place emotionally to be able to tell her story. So, without further delay, this is part one of Iri's story. I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Iri. Hey, SAS listeners, I'm very excited to have with us today Iri Stafylaki. Welcome, Iri. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
It's really an honor that you reached out to me, and it's an honor that you are willing to tell your story here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. Before we get going on that, could you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm currently 20 years old and I'm in nursing school. I work in a hospital in healthcare. I'm in school as well. I love doing sports. I'm a very musical person and I love animals. I've got 3 cats. I live in a quite big family. I've got 3 sisters and 2 step-siblings. So that's a little bit about ourselves. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. I know that when you first started talking to me, you were telling me a little bit of some of the consequences of the fallout that had happened after you were sexually assaulted.
Yes.
So I want to get into that. But before we get there, What are you able to tell us about your sexual assault experience?
I can go into the process of how we met because I think that's very significant. I think the time where we started to become a couple, because it was my ex-partner who had raped me. I think it's important to talk about the red flags that I did see but kind of ignored that led to this situation right now. And it was honestly just a lot of gradual increasing of intention of just violent behavior or just jokes that are not really jokes that are at my expense. It kind of started out like this. The fallout was very much in regard to me being an athlete. I used to play basketball in the first league national team, which by no means that I was a very good player or valuable player. I just played there and I loved basketball with all my heart. I met him, I believe it was 2 years ago, just at a random day in practice. I saw him and I think I was going to the men's practice because our practice was called off. And I went into his practice and we kind of met for the first time and we did some drills and I kind of got to know him better. And I really liked him. He was such a fun guy, such a genuine guy. Later on, I found out that he had a girlfriend at the time and I just pulled back a bit. And a few months after that, he offered to drive me home after practice. And I said, well, yeah, because it was quite late and it was winter and the bus connections were horrible. And we kind of got to talking, and our connection basically started off with music and our taste in music and our interests. I'm a person who's very sensitive to music. I listen to a lot of different genres and everything, and being able to share that with someone is very much a bonding experience for me. So he dropped me off at my house and we exchanged our Spotify profiles and we started texting mainly about music. I believe a couple of weeks after that, he sent me a text that he had broken up with his girlfriend at the time, which I believe they were together for about 2 years. I tried to comfort him a bit and he was just, well, I'm really over it. I don't want to see her anymore. It was all one and done. I don't miss her at all. And I said, well, we have become quite close friends at this point, that I told him it's important to take your time to heal and everything, because I did notice that he was making very flirtatious comments, dropping hints here and there. And I kind of picked up on it and I told him, well, look, I very much appreciate it, but I believe we should take it slow and everything. He refused a bit. I think 2 weeks after he broke up with his girlfriend of 2 years, we were intimate for the first time. I remember this very vividly because afterwards he asked me, well, what are we now? And I said, well, listen, we don't have to put a label on it or anything. I'm very much fragile state as I am because I was in a very bad state mentally at the point. I think a month prior to that, I was in hospital in emergency care because I did attempt suicide. And I was also very much intertwined in an addiction with self-harm. I remember he also was so caring towards me in that regard. I remember one time I caught myself and I was worried about if I have to be rushed to hospital, and I texted him and he drove to my place right away and looked at the wound and tried to help me. He brought me chocolate, he comforted me, and I was just like, wow, this is such a nice guy. I can't believe I'm able to be honest and vulnerable in that position that I'm in, and someone actually listens to me and cares for me. Mm-hmm. That was totally new and I really appreciated it. I told him that because I was very fragile, I was in art school at the time, I was very much stressed out, that I wasn't able to establish a relationship with him at the time, and that also it was just moving quite too fast for me. Yeah. After we had a couple of conversations, he pressured me into a corner saying, well, either we are boyfriend, girlfriend, or we are nothing. I don't want to talk to you anymore. We can't be just friends because that's not what we are. Mm. And I just collapsed under this pressure and started crying and everything. I was quite prone at the time to panic attacks. I had a panic attack disorder. I still have it, but I'm under control now. But it would get so intense that I would get psychological non-epileptic seizures. And I started seizing after that conversation about whether or not we have to be in a relationship. And it was after the seizure that I was in a very much foggy mind state that I was, okay, well, sure, let's be in a relationship now. And that's how our relationship started.
Yeah.
And again, he always seemed or like presented himself as a very caring person. Not even about me, but about the environment, for example. He was very keen on doing his part against climate change. But again, there were aspects that I picked up on where I saw he doesn't really do that consistently. Like, for example, he was such a nerd about caring for the environment. He was vegan and everything, and I'm vegan as well. But he would always, I mean, always go to places by car. He lived in the city and we would drive by car to like a route that was by bus 5 minutes. It was just those little things that now really stick with me to kind of explain what I picked up on or what I saw him as, or the difference between how he talked about himself and how he actually was doing things. It was very much contradictory. So we go on in the relationship. The first few months, it's all fine. It's all sweet and caring. We have so much fun. We shared such a similar taste in humor. I remember one time I was really sick in bed with the flu, and we always played an online game, and it was so much fun. I just remember being happy and feeling like I found a person who reacts so positively to me, and we bounce off of each other. And I was just so genuinely surprised as to how do I deserve that? How do I deserve someone who cares about me this deeply, who comes and picks me up before dates? However, later on, it started with him poking jokes. They were not really jokes in front of me at first. He would do this behind closed doors. He would just poke fun at my scars from self-harm, or I also had an eating disorder at the time. And one time we were at dinner with my family and I was wearing pajamas and it said WTF, where's the food on my shirt? And he just made a comment about, well, it's kind of ironic that you're wearing this shirt regarding your eating disorder. And my family didn't know at all about me struggling with eating or not having a healthy relationship with food. And he kind of just dropped the bomb there.
Yeah.
I remember vividly, I had a great relationship with his mother. His mother was such a kind soul. And I remember on Fridays after school, I would go over to his house and she would cook in the kitchen. And I would just watch her cook because she was just such an amazing cook and we would just talk. And at one point, he walked into the kitchen. They cooked quite spicy food and I'm not good at handling spice. And he said something to the point of, well, don't cook her spicy food or else she'll do this. And he'd make a motion of me slitting my wrist. And I just didn't even know what to say at that point. I just kind of sat in the chair in the corner and just continued to talk to his mother. And his mother reacted quite positively to this in regards to, you know, she tried to talk to me saying like, oh, well, look, I totally understand. I used to struggle with self-harm too. And we kind of bonded over that. But it was quite an uncomfortable situation to be in, as you can imagine.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of shame attached to self-harm. And it was just, I felt so exposed, I think. I was just like, why would you say that? And after the jokes started, he would also start comparing our intimate life with that of his ex-girlfriend, saying that I wasn't enough or I couldn't satisfy all his needs. And he would very often pull his brother in the conversations, like just verbally saying that very vulgarly, oh, well, my brother fucks a lot. He does this and that, like, why don't we? I was surprised because I didn't really know that side of him that was so vulgar and weird about it. And I actually remember when he told me that he had told his brother that he was dating me, the first response his brother had was, well, did you hit her? Did you guys hook up? Because I was thinking about doing the same to her because she's very much sought after in the basketball community there. And I felt really disgusted. Are you serious? You're telling your brother about how we are dating and his first response is, well, did you fuck her? It was just so vulgar and inhumane to me. It was just, I felt so objectified.
Yeah.
And in regards to the whole basketball team, he would very often, because we played in the same club actually, he would come to me sometimes after practice or whenever we met And he told me that in the team, they would play this game called Smash or Pass. It was just like a very trivial game about you pick out a person and you decide if you want to smash them, meaning be intimate with them, or pass, meaning you don't want to do anything with them. And he would tell me about every single person who said that they would be intimate with me. He told me how they were going to do that. He told me why and when and just everything about it. So I felt like, okay, is that all I'm here for? I felt so conflicted about feeling his one side that was so caring and funny, and he would send me songs that I would like, and we would have such deep conversations about whatever, share our love for animals. And he was also like very good with my family. My family absolutely adored him. They loved him. My friends loved him. Everyone was, oh, you guys are gonna marry each other. You're so good for each other. And behind closed doors, he was just, well, this is what you are. You're just someone or something to be used. Even with compliments, I just heard that on a daily basis. Whenever he would make a compliment, it very rapidly turned sexual. He would often use this little joke. He kind of described me as the porn star type of deal, but that I'm actually not, like poking fun at the fact that I did have issues being intimate with people, just because intimacy is something that is quite scary to me. I believe a lot of women have a very conflicting relationship towards intimacy and being sexualized by other people and allowing ourselves to sexualize ourselves. I mean, I was catcalled the first time I was 11 years old. At the end of the day, you're just here for pleasure. I think every woman has a bit of that in them. Not only women, I believe some people who just grow up like that or receive these inputs from the outside world that they're just here for pleasure. And that's just absolutely horrible. That's kind of the middle of the relationship. I kind of break it down into little parts because I do have trouble remembering, the timeline exactly. It's just all so much. It's hard to break it down into one timeline.
Yeah. And Erie, before we go any further, I want to tell you that I'm really sorry for the experience that you had pre-relationship with him. Before all that even started, I'm really sorry for the experiences that you've had, the self-harm, the suicidal ideation, those suicide attempts. I know that's very difficult to work through. But then to have all of this compounded and exacerbate the situation that's already hard for you, he's put you into this really difficult situation of, like you said, objectifying you and using you for his own psychological warped pleasure and the physicality of it all. It's sad to listen to that, but also a great opportunity, I think, for you to talk about this in the way that you are.
Yeah.
I really think that just in the short time we've been talking, I'm so impressed with how strong you are and willing to talk about the vulnerability issues that you're going through and that you did go through. And I really appreciate you being open and willing to talk to us like this. I didn't mean to interrupt the flow, but I certainly understand.
That's all right.
No, I understand how difficult it is to put all this together. We're talking trauma, and trauma interferes with the ability to put things into chronological order. Trauma interferes with memory. So don't feel alone in this in terms of the struggle that you're having in putting all this together. I certainly understand it, and I think most of my audience does too. It's just part of that trauma experience. Keep it up. You're doing really good. You're doing great.
Thank you so much for those words. That really means a lot to me. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
It breaks my heart that you've had to go through as much as you've had to go through. And the audience, I'm sure, is interested in hearing more about your experience. So again, I apologize for interfering with that flow, but thank you for doing this.
It's not an issue at all. You didn't interrupt me at all. And it's my pleasure. I think it's important to focus on what state we are when we enter a relationship. Like for me, I was so fragile and I was really depending on just love. I just wanted to be cared about. And of course, my family cares about me and they love me, but I needed that in another way. I just needed someone from the outside world showing me that, hey, you are valuable and you're funny. And I know for myself, I'm a very talkative person and I love rambling about music and everything. And like, little things that I just obsess about. And he kind of just picked that up and pulled me in with this. And I think it's important to talk about the circumstances, of course, considering that he was aware of my state as well. He knew how fragile I was. He knew I was in therapy. He knew about my suicide attempt. He was aware of all of it. And he actually has a family who worked in healthcare. And that was quite an interesting aspect to it as well. The next part is where a lot of other people get introduced to the story. Unfortunately, it gets quite messy and chaotic in regards to who the protagonists are in this story. But I had a relationship when I was 15 years old with another basketball player. I was friends with him for a very, very long time, and my boyfriend at the time knew about him. And so one day we were talking about our first experiences being intimate with other people. And I kind of talked about, my experience with my first boyfriend. I don't remember exactly the words I said, but somehow he took my sentence and like kind of turned it back a bit. And he was like, oh, well, it sounds like he raped you. It sounds like to me that you were asleep and he raped you. And I was talking about kind of another thing where just like waking up in the middle of the night and like being, having fun and all that. Mm-hmm. And he kind of talked me into this corner of, no, he raped you. Like you were raped by him. And I was so scared and confused. At first, I was like, oh my God, he did? I never saw it that way. I was like, no, we were just 15. Everyone does this whenever they have their first experience. They just, experiment with things, but it wasn't rape. It was never rape. But I believed him for like a short second and I was just very confused. I kind of just let that sink in. We didn't really talk about it that much after. One day after practice, we were driving home and he tells me that he had told my ex-boyfriend's, sorry if it gets messy, my ex-boyfriend's best friend, they all play basketball, they all know each other. He had told my ex-boyfriend's best friend that my ex-boyfriend was a rapist, that he had raped me. And he also told him about my self-harm, which honestly wasn't a surprise to the people because even if I did wear a sleeve during practice, sometimes I would just get hot and like take it off. I didn't really care much at the time because I just thought, well, that's just who I am. I've got this scar. I know it's disgusting, but what can I do? I'm hot. I need to take my sleeve off. And he went into detail about how they were talking about me being someone who was actively self-harming. And he was like, isn't that such a turn-off for you? That best friend, he was just like asking such weird questions. And my boyfriend at the time just came straight to me and told me everything about it. And he was just so proud of himself for telling him. He said, no, well, I warned him about it. He's a rapist, like he raped you. And I'm allowed to speak about it because it's wrong. That behavior is wrong. And he raped you and that's his fault. And I just wanted his friend to know that he was a rapist. And I just kind of sat in a car and I was like, yeah, well, I wish you would just talk to me first about just even, we haven't like finished this conversation of was that rape? Because I knew that it wasn't, but I was just so overwhelmed with the thought of it potentially being rape because I just never thought about it that way. And him being my boyfriend, I trusted him. I very much valued his opinion on things. And if he's telling me that someone did harm on me, well, then he just cares about me. He just wants me to be safe. So there must be some sort of truth to what he's saying. Why else would he tell me this? Why would he continuously pressure me into thinking that my ex-boyfriend had raped me? And that just kind of goes along. I completely forget what happens after that, but the relationship just kind of starts tumbling and going downhill. These comments about me not being enough, me looking like I'm a very seductive person or like very sexual and then not being it by his words was just so, it was too much for me to the point where I just sat him down and told him, look, I think we need to open up this relationship because I don't feel that I am enough for you. I didn't phrase it that way, to be fair. I didn't want to tell him that he made me feel this way, because he was very much sensitive to criticism. Whenever I would confront him with something, he would get so incredibly sad and angry that I would end up having to comfort him.
Yeah.
So I kind of didn't phrase it that way because I didn't want him to get sad. I didn't want him to feel the way he made me feel. So I just kind of went on, well, we're young, we should experiment. We are very much not monogamous. We should just, see what happens. Or I was just not a fan of like this structure of you're with this person and you're with this person only,
right?
Especially with a person who was very demanding in certain aspects. I just could not keep up with it. I was so much under pressure. And I think I didn't really realize it, that I was suggesting an open relationship because it felt too much for me. I think I only realized that in the past year that was the case, because I was wondering, why did I suggest that so often, so regularly? I would sit him down and be, listen, I can't do this. I also, a lot of the times, would wake up in the middle of the night and sit in the corner of the room, and he would like wake up and be like, what's up? And I would just say, I'm not comfortable. I don't know what's going on. I'm not feeling well in this constellation. I think we should break up. I wanted to break up so many times.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I thought, well, he cared for me that much. He rushed to me when I needed help. He listened to me when I rant. He likes things about me. He made me feel good at one part. And I only remembered that part, so that we just decided to carry on the relationship. And it just went on that way. And it went on and on and on. It just gradually got worse and worse. Of course, there were a lot of beautiful times, which made the whole experience even more confusing, because people oftentimes have this conception of someone who is able to sexually assault someone, they must be a terrible person all of the time, which is simply not the case. They actively present themselves as something. They know exactly what they're doing. And it's that kind of thought that I had where I was, after the whole relationship, he knew exactly what he was telling me and what he was doing. And especially with the parts about telling me that my ex-boyfriend had raped me in my sleep. That part was the most calculated part, because I believe 3 months after he started this rumor, basically, he just went on telling people that my ex-boyfriend had raped me. He raped me in the exact same way he had told everyone else. That was just absolutely, I did not see that coming. I can tell you that. I was so in shock.
Yeah.
It felt like such a calculated move. It was just the exact same way he had told everyone else, and then he just did it.
To me, as I hear you explain all this, it's a classic example of multiple abuses. But I think the words, as far as labels and identifying what was going on, some of the thoughts that I'm having as you talk about this are, first of all, power and control.
Yeah,
and I don't know
definitely.
if you're familiar with the power and control wheel in the interpersonal relationship realm. Law enforcement and victim advocacy and mental health workers often refer to that power and control wheel. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar. Please tell me more about it. Very interesting.
Well, it's a diagram that is used to talk about someone, and the center of it are the words power and control. There are multiple areas around that wheel that a person will attempt and eventually manipulate their way into a person's life in such a way that they have power and control over finances, social interactions, family. If children are involved, like if you're in a relationship and you have children, then there's the issue of family control and power. Multiple areas like that where the person uses exactly some of the things that you're talking about, the word manipulations and really grooming. And they start off the relationship in such a way that it's wonderful. It's like a honeymoon and things are great. But then there's these little jabs and tensions and assaults and abuses that start occurring. And if it's physical, it's often, just a pinch or a slap or a shove. If it's sexual, it's the things that you're talking about, where there's comments that are inappropriate, liberties that are taken with the other person that the other person doesn't feel comfortable with, and maybe has even verbalized that. And so they start exploiting those and using those, turning situations like you've described, where you already had mental health issues and self-destructive tendencies and issues going on in your life. And so they take those things and exploit them and manipulate them and turn them into weapons. They weaponize the entire relationship. That's what I'm hearing from your description of all this, is the grooming and the manipulation. Like you said, I mean, for him to take your confidence and your privacy and your intimacy with other people and then turn that into something that it wasn't is very definitely not just an attempt, but a position that he's taking. You've heard the term gaslighting.
Yeah, definitely.
And a lot of that is gaslighting, where he's saying things that are factual that you're saying, no, that's not the facts. That's not what happened. And he's saying, oh, yes, it is. You must be mistaken, or you don't understand how this ex-boyfriend raped you by taking that situation and manipulating that intimacy into a rape. You're just uninformed, but yes, you were raped. Of course, that's a manipulation and a way to use you and twist things around to make you confused and vulnerable. And even the breakup, the whole issue of not wanting to be in the relationship like that, it's classic. It really is. And I'm really sorry for the experience that you had in going through all that. That must have been extremely terrifying in certain aspects. Am I right?
It was, but I believe the most horrible part was I didn't have a sense anymore of what was real. I completely just was, what is even going on? I remember vividly, I was, what's going on? Who's pulling my leg? I can't believe any of this is going on. And as the relationship reached its end, it was at its most extreme, so extreme that he broke up with me in the end, especially after the rape happened. I remember the next morning, I actually have to go a bit into detail as to how that happened to kind of explain why I was so dissociative for the remainder of the relationship, because I was just such a different person. For me, I don't think he noticed that much, but me internally, I did not feel like myself. Yeah. So as I said, I was asleep, and at the time I was not sober, but he was. And it was always quite interesting to me. We would smoke marijuana a lot of the time, and I've always had issues falling asleep, staying asleep, especially with someone else in the bed. I would never get a full night's sleep whenever I slept with someone else in the bed. It's just always been like that. And I remember a couple of nights before the rape happened, or even months, I don't remember exact the timeline, I would have such deep sleep that it was kind of eerie to me. I was the only one smoking. He wasn't. I would come home and he would have rolled a joint for me, and I would smoke it and go to sleep, and I was dead asleep. That thought of, holy shit, I was the only one smoking it, that even only occurred to me half a year ago. I didn't notice at the time. That specific night, I was asleep, and I remember vividly one of the most horrifying things. If I can talk about it, I was laying on my left side with my face towards the door. He was behind me. He did not see my face. It was the middle of the night, and it wasn't like we had just gotten to bed and it was like, oh, couples when they just get to bed, or it was like almost morning. No, it was the middle of the night. We were both asleep and I was just sleeping. And so I'm still kind of in this high, of course, because I had smoked a joint, Mm-hmm. And I kind of noticed some like pets and touches on my body. And I was like, oh, well, it's just like, he's just cuddling me. And I continued to fall asleep. Then he started to increase, I don't know, the touch. I don't know how to explain that. But the most eerie detail that I remember from this night is, and that's why I strongly believe that he knew I was asleep, because he kept telling me he thought I was awake. He did not see my face, as I said before. He did not check my face. He did not wake me up. And the most eerie part, as I said, was when he started to undress me, he did it in such a careful and slow way, as if to not wake me up. And I remember this. I was sort of awake, but I kept like dozing off again because I was high. I was tired. I remember it was a time, it was in summer. And actually, I told you I was in art school at the time. And I was so stressed out. I was just tired. And it just happened. And I remember it, I kind of froze in that moment. I remember just staring at the door. And at one point, I slightly moved my foot, really slightly, and he stopped immediately. I was just laying like a rock there, like a corpse. I was not moving at all. He must have known that I was asleep. Why didn't he wake me up? I remember having such a bad feeling because, well, I knew what was happening. Sort of, I was like in this weird state between being conscious of what was happening, but also being so exhausted and tired. I just wanted sleep. I was sleeping. I felt so bad for such a long time because I was kind of telling me that, well, I was awake. I should have said something. I should have told him to stop. But in reality, if he's initiating an act, the probability of me being asleep in the middle of the night is quite high.
Yeah.
He should have woken me up. I put the blame so much on myself just because I was awake when it happened. Like I felt like that took away from the fact that it was rape because I was awake or just kind of aware that it was happening. So I move my foot, he immediately stops, and I just immediately go, because I knew what was upset him, I just immediately go, it's okay. And I just get up and I rush to my bag. I still take medication, but I was actually prescribed Temesta. I don't know if you know what Temesta is.
No,
it's benzodiazepine. I don't know. It's just quite a harsh. I've only taken it like once or twice. It's basically for really intense panic attacks. It calms you. Lorazepam, is his name.
Yeah,
Lorazepam,
I'm familiar with that.
And I took, I believe, 2 pills because I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to die. I remember the night, but it was just so foggy. At one point, I think I was looking up bus connections on my phone because I thought, well, now I have to flee. I have to leave now. I can't stay in this house because we were home alone. I can't stay here. I need to leave. And it was like 4 a.m. or something. I really don't remember, but it was very much early in the morning. And I just went to the living room and slept there for the remainder of the night because I was just too exhausted to leave. I just stayed there. And in the morning, I didn't really sleep that much. But I woke up and he was sitting in front of me, crying his eyes out. I just wake up immediately to this image of him bawling his eyes out. And it wasn't like he was sobbing. He was just constantly touching his eyes, rubbing his eyes, hiding his face, sniffling, things like that. His face was not wet. Let me just say that. His face was dry as a bone. And I just immediately went into comforting him. And I told him, no, it was a misunderstanding. Sorry that I was provocative in my sleep. I went on to apologize and apologize and apologize. And we talked about it for 10 minutes. And then the day just carried out as normal. We went to grab food. It was all fine. I comforted him for 10 minutes over a thing that he claimed had destroyed him. He said he was so ashamed of himself. And he put himself in such a bad light that I was almost like, no, I didn't want it to be true. And I think that's why I told him, no, it wasn't rape. Did not want it to be true. So we just talked about it for 10 minutes and we just left it at that. And we didn't speak about it for like a month. We just carried on. Everything was as normal, as far as normal can be. But deep inside, I was so confused. I felt so incredibly gross. I could not sleep in the same bed as him. And actually, a few weeks after that happened, we went on holiday to Italy. And I remember there, of course, I had to sleep in a bed with him because there was only one bed in like the hotel room. And of course, one thing that I think a lot of victims who get sexually assaulted in relationships, some of them stay in that relationship and they feel as if them staying takes away from the fact that it was an abusive relationship, because I did not actively make that choice. I just did not want it to be true. I didn't want to hear the fact that I had been raped by someone I was in a relationship with. And yes, I continued to be in that relationship and I continued to be intimate with him, but it was never the same. I was internally so numb, and whenever we would get intimate, I would just dissociate and I would just let everything happen. I just didn't care anymore because I just thought, well, I'm just here. I don't even have to do anything anymore. I'm just there for use, I believe. There was a moment though in that holiday where we had actually went from a hotel to an Airbnb. I had brought a book with me, and I would always claim that I had fallen asleep on the couch reading the book. So that's why I didn't come to bed with him to sleep there. I could not sleep in the same bed with him. I just always slept on that very small couch and just always said, oh no, I just fell asleep reading the book. It's no worries. And sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and be like, what are you doing on the couch? Come sleep in the bed. And I would go, oh, of course, yeah. And I just always felt, oh, fuck, now it didn't work. Now I have to go sleep in the same bed with him. And that actually happened when we came home as well. Sometimes when he would sleep over at my place, I would just be like, sorry, I got to sleep on a couch, or I'm going to sleep in my mom's bed. Literally, I was 19 sleeping in my mom's bed because I was scared to sleep in a bed with him. Around that time, after the holiday, we also had a discussion again about an open relationship. This time, it was him who brought it up. He was, listen, I think we should open up this relationship. And to be fair, I got quite pissed at that because I just thought, have you been listening to me for the past months? Yeah. And I said those exact words. I told him, didn't you listen to me the past months? And he replied, you know, some people are kind smart and some people are mean smart, and you are mean smart. You're so mean when it comes about correcting me. You're such a smart ass. And that's just kind of how that conversation carried out. We got into an argument. We left holidays kind of in that argument a bit. And I remember the first time he showed violent behaviors, his issues controlling his aggressions, because I did not see that side of him, of course. He was always just very much aggressive with his words and, of course, in a sexual way, but I never saw him freak out and wanting to hit people. Something like that as an example for what I understand under physical aggression. It was a day where we were back in Switzerland, everything was fine, and I had an appointment at the dentist. And we were texting back and forth about that conversation we had in Italy. And he just told me, I feel like you only take from me and I only give to you. I feel like you don't feel anything towards me and I gave up so much for you. I paid for the holiday. I pay for your meals whenever we go out to meet, just everything like that. And he just said, I don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. I was just texting him back, taking my part in conversation, being like, okay, look, if you feel about it, we can discuss it. But I've got an appointment at a dentist right now. I can't speak to you at the moment. So I go to the dentist, I walk home, and suddenly my mom calls me. And I told her as I left the house, I'm going to the dentist. She calls me and she said, where are you? And I said, I'm on my way home. Is everything all right? She said, yeah, everything's all right. I just wanted to know where you are. Like, where exactly are you at this moment? And I said, I'm on my way home. At this point, I was at a nearby school. I told her, I'm at the school. I'm like coming home in like 5 minutes. She was, oh, fine. And I asked her, everything's all right? Because she never does that. When I tell her I'm going to the dentist, she knows I'm going to the dentist, and she's not a person to stress me out about anything. Yeah. That was just so strange. And I thought, that's odd. So I continue my walk home. I walk towards my front door, and who do I see? My boyfriend at the time. He was shaking. He was completely pale. He was crying almost. And I just looked at him and went, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be at work. He was working. It was the middle of a workday. And he said, you didn't reply to my messages. And I thought you had done something to yourself. So I came here because I was scared that you had done something to yourself. And I told him, no, I'm all right. I just went to the dentist. What messages didn't come through? I replied to you. I got the notification that you read it. We talked about this. And again, I comforted him. I've never seen him that way. He was completely pale. I thought he was about to pass out. So we went in and I just kind of gave him a glass of water to calm down. And I noticed my mom wasn't around. What's going on here? And we go out in the garden to catch some fresh air, have a cigarette, calm down. And we go into this conversation again. Again, this argument of him not wanting to be in a relationship with me and him feeling like I'm using him. And so we get into this argument, and eventually I think my mom comes home, but then she left again because I just saw her from the side of my vision because we were just started getting loud. And at one point I just started to cry, especially after he left. He just left somehow. He just was like, oh, I've had enough of this. I'm going to leave. So I was alone in the garden and I just cried. Again, my mom called me and she was, are you okay? And I said, no, I'm not. Where are you? And she said, I couldn't bear the way he was talking to you. I literally had to leave the house and go take a walk. She was so overwhelmed. My mom left me in that situation, and I don't blame her for it because, as I said, I am an adult. I could take care of it by myself, but it was so sad for my mom to hear me cry this way and hearing another person talk to me this way that she just had to leave. And that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
After we broke up, actually, like later on, there's a lot of parts of the story where I go back and forth just because new information kind of comes out.
Yeah.
Turned out my mom told me when I was at the dentist, he came home to me, hoping to see me. So he came home, he was really angry, he was like moving a lot, he was pacing around in the hallway, and my mom kept asking him, are you okay? Because my mom never saw him that way. My mom always thought, that's such a nice guy. He loved talking to her, they would always talk about things, whatever, and she had never seen him that way. She was, what's going on? Are you okay? And he would refuse to tell her what was going on. He just kept asking where I was, and he demanded that she'd call me to see where I was. And she was, no, I'm not going to do that. She's at the dentist. I know where she is. She's on her way home probably now. And he just kept pressuring her, you need to call her. And so she called me, and he also sneaked in. Just don't tell her I'm here. I don't want her to know that I'm here. So that's why she called me. She called me because he was at home pressuring my mom, and my mom's a doctor actually, and she remembers she thought he was going to pass out. He was so incredibly angry, and he seemed like he had a lot of pent up energy that he needed to let go. He seemed like he wanted to punch someone. And so she got scared as well. That's why she decided to leave. And then she came back around to check if I was home. She saw me in the garden and left again. So that's kind of what happened there in detail.
Yeah.
And my mom told me that after the fact that we had broken up because she didn't want to mess with my relationships. She did tell me when we did break up that she was glad it happened. To be honest, it just seemed like such a short and a long time at the same time for me. I've lost track of what happened during the summer of 2022. I have absolutely no idea. I also don't know the exact date where the rape had taken place. I do know some peripheral, circumstantial things that I know, well, it must have been around in this time, but I did find a lot of videos that I had taken myself because at that point I was quite bad in terms of dissociating. I would dissociate a lot and I would just have these crying spells out of nowhere. I had trouble bringing this up in therapy because I was also in therapy at the time. And my therapist had asked me to record it or maybe like write it down what was happening at the moment. So I would oftentimes record myself. Yeah. And I found so many videos of me sobbing in his house, like when he wasn't around. And I remember one particular one where I was just completely out of it. I believe I was just recording and I sat down and I started to put sunscreen on my face and I just broke down crying and I just couldn't stop. And I called my mom and I told her to please come pick me up from my old boyfriend's place. He wasn't there, he was at work, but I just had this crying spell out of nowhere. And I remember thinking, why am I crying? What's happening? I didn't understand why I was crying. And I would have that so much. It was just really, really bad. That's kind of the whole relationship put in a timeline. And of course, that's only one part. The fallout that is coming now is honestly a much more chaotic and completely unbelievable story.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Thank you for being with me this week as we listened to the strength and endurance of Iri Stafylaki's harrowing story. In next week's episode, Iri explains how getting out of the relationship with her rapist boyfriend wasn't the end of the torment that she endured from him. You'll hear all about the fallout and impact of the breakup that exacerbated Iri's trauma. Please be sure to rate this week's episode and leave a comment of encouragement for Iri. I know she would appreciate it. And if you haven't already, Please subscribe to the podcast and tell everyone you know about the unbelievable impact that this podcast is having in the lives of sexual assault and rape victims and survivors. It's only one way you can do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Another way is to start by believing. And that's important because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week.